Every crisis in America comes with a warning sign. This time, it isn't flashing on Wall Street. It's sitting right in your grocery cart. When a single bag of food costs more than a utility bill, when $8 ketchup and $12 chicken breasts feel normal, and when families who once lived comfortably now ration meals like it's wartime, something is deeply, dangerously wrong. This isn't inflation anymore. This is a slow-motion food collapse, one that quietly drains savings, crushes paychecks, and exposes just how fragile the American economy truly is. And the scariest part? We're only at the beginning. America has entered a stage where everyday groceries now function like premium commodities, and the numbers reveal a shift so extreme it borders on economic malpractice. Staples that once anchored the household budget, bread, eggs, milk, chicken, have turned into price shocks hiding in plain sight. A carton of eggs that hovered near $1.50 now sits closer to $4 to $6 in many regions. A single pound of ground beef, once a reliable $3 purchase, routinely grazes $7 to $9. Even a basic fast food meal, once the fallback for tight budgets, now crosses $12 without sides. What used to be the cheap option has become a luxury that American families can no longer depend on. This shift isn't random or accidental. It's the result of a multi-level cost chain where every link has become more expensive: production, packaging, transportation, and corporate margin stacking. Instead of absorbing part of the inflationary pressure, companies passed nearly all of it to customers, creating a marketplace where the consumer always loses. Shrinkflation quietly deepens the wound. Bags contain less, boxes are smaller, protein portions are trimmed, and yet the price tags keep climbing. You're not imagining it. You are paying more and getting less deliberately. What makes this era so jarring is the pace. In some categories, prices have risen faster in the last 3 years than in the prior 20 combined. This is why shoppers walk out of stores stunned. The mathematical relationship between wages and food costs has snapped, creating a permanent affordability gap. Even a household earning $75,000 now struggles to keep grocery spending under control because the economics of food have detached from the economics of income. Worse, the inflation in groceries doesn't behave like inflation elsewhere. Once a food company hikes a price, it rarely comes back down. What Americans are living through is not temporary dislocation but a structural reset. An economy where corporations discovered they could raise food prices dramatically, blame macroeconomic chaos, and maintain the elevated baseline indefinitely. This is not simply about groceries costing more. It's about a fundamental realignment of what food costs in America and what households must sacrifice to keep eating at all. The most disturbing consequence of the new food reality is not just the higher prices. It's what Americans are silently giving up to survive it. Across the country, households are quietly shrinking meal sizes, skipping protein, replacing nutrient-dense foods with the cheapest fillers, and normalizing diets built around whatever stretches the paycheck the longest. The shift is subtle but severe, a nutritional downgrade happening at scale. National surveys show that over 38% of middle-income families now substitute fresh produce with canned or frozen alternatives because the price spread has grown too wide. Protein intake has taken an even sharper hit. Chicken breast, which once anchored weeknight dinners, is being swapped for $1 instant noodles, 79-cent canned soups, and ultra-processed snacks that offer calories but little nourishment. Even families earning $90,000 report cutting back on meat entirely for multiple days each week, not out of preference but necessity. This adaptation is creating a nutritional divide that mirrors the economic one. High-quality food, lean proteins, fresh vegetables, whole grains, has drifted further out of reach for millions, forcing people toward cheaper calories that fill the stomach but undermine long-term health. It isn't starvation in the traditional sense. It's a steady erosion of diet quality that weakens households from the inside out. Dietitians now warn that the average American is unintentionally consuming 20 to 30% more low-grade carbohydrates than before, simply because healthier options no longer align with the household budget. Even school lunches, once a reliable nutritional buffer, are straining under higher input costs. Districts across multiple states report scaling back portion sizes or eliminating fresh items entirely because budgets can't accommodate the new supply prices. Meanwhile, SNAP benefits have failed to track actual food inflation, leaving a monthly grocery allowance that, in many states, covers barely half of what it did 5 years ago. What emerges is a crisis hidden behind closed pantry doors. Families technically have food, yet the quality and quantity have deteriorated to alarming levels. This silent hunger isn't captured in unemployment charts or GDP growth. It shows up in weaker meals, thinner grocery bags, and the growing realization that the American diet is being downgraded without a single headline announcing it. Behind every overpriced grocery item sits a supply chain that has quietly fractured. What Americans are experiencing at checkout isn't random inflation. It's the cumulative failure of a system stretched to its limits. Every link, from farm to warehouse to retail, is absorbing higher costs and reduced efficiency, and the result is a pipeline that delivers less, delivers slower, and charges more. Transportation is the most immediate pressure point, with diesel hovering between $4.50 and $6 per gallon in many regions. Shipping a truckload of produce now costs significantly more than it did just a few years ago. Refrigerated transport, critical for fresh food, has seen even sharper spikes due to energy surcharges and maintenance shortages. When it costs more to move food, consumers pay the difference. Labor remains another structural fault line. The industry is short tens of thousands of truck drivers, warehouse workers, and processing plant employees. This shortfall forces companies to run thinner crews, extend delivery times, and cut corners on handling and inspection. When produce spends extra hours at loading docks or in transit, quality declines before it even reaches the shelf. This is why shoppers increasingly find bruised fruit, limp greens, or meat that spoils faster despite unchanged expiration dates. Packaging introduces another layer of volatility. The cost of plastics, cardboard, and aluminum has climbed sharply, with some materials up 25 to 40%. Manufacturers offset these increases by reducing package size or using cheaper inputs, which compromises durability and shelf stability. A weaker package means more damaged goods, more spoilage, and more wastage, inefficiencies that eventually show up on the price tag. Even distribution centers, once the backbone of grocery reliability, are under pressure. Many are operating with outdated equipment, staff shortages, and rising electricity costs, pushing inventory turnover to dangerous speeds. Faster rotation means less time to screen out damaged items, allowing lower quality products to slip through. What emerges is a supply chain operating on emergency mode, where every component is optimized for survival, not quality. This is how the system now produces food that costs more, lasts less, and arrives in worse condition, an unavoidable consequence of a logistical framework no longer built for stability. As the supply chain weakens, the next consequence emerges on the shelf itself: a nationwide decline in food quality that Americans can see, smell, and taste. What used to be rare, rotten onions in sealed bags, mold on berries the same day of purchase, meat with an unfamiliar texture, has become a routine part of grocery shopping. This degradation isn't consumer paranoia. It's the direct outcome of a system running on thinner margins, fewer workers, and accelerated turnover. Produce is the most visible casualty. With longer transit times and fewer hands inspecting shipments, fruits and vegetables often hit stores at the end of their freshness cycle. Retailers quietly report that spoilage losses have risen between 18% and 30%. And instead of discarding everything, more borderline products slip onto shelves in an attempt to recoup costs. Customers end up paying full price for items with half the lifespan. Dry goods aren't immune either. Stale snacks, hardened bread, and candy that taste a year old reflect deeper issues in storage and inventory rotation. Rising warehouse energy costs have pushed facilities to reduce cooling, and staff shortages mean products sit longer before restocking. This is how an item stamped with a distant expiration date can still arrive in a degraded state. The most unsettling decline, however, is in the meat aisle. processors facing higher operational expenses increasingly rely on cheaper fillers, lower-grade cuts, and aggressive tenderizers. Consumers notice inconsistencies: beef that turns brown faster, chicken that emits a sour odor within days, or pre-marinated products with textures that feel chemically altered. These aren't isolated incidents. They're the symptoms of an industry forced to stretch limited resources. Meanwhile, price pressures encourage retailers to purchase from suppliers offering the lowest bids, even if quality standards drop. A shipment of subpar goods is less damaging to corporate margins than losing inventory entirely. So more questionable products reach the customer without warning. As households adapt to higher prices, they face a new reality: paying premium rates for food that spoils quicker, tastes worse, and delivers lower nutritional value. The crisis is no longer just about affordability. It's about the reliability of the food supply itself and the unsettling truth that the system can no longer guarantee quality. Once food prices began rising, America's largest manufacturers discovered something far more profitable than temporary inflation. Consumers would tolerate increases far beyond genuine production costs. This revelation triggered a corporate pricing loop, a cycle where companies raise prices, blame external conditions, and then lock those increases in permanently. What began as a response to global disruption has evolved into a blueprint for extracting more revenue from every household. Financial filings expose the strategy clearly. Major food conglomerates reported profit jumps of 20 to 50% during periods when they publicly claimed to be struggling with inflation. Their expenses rose modestly, but retail prices soared. The difference became pure margin. This gap is the core of the pricing loop. External events give corporations cover to raise prices aggressively, and once customers adjust, there is no incentive to reverse them. Packaging practices reinforce this dynamic. Instead of making visible price cuts, companies quietly reduce product volume while keeping prices intact. A cereal box that once held 18 ounces now carries 14. A bag of chips filled 2/3 with air is sold at identical cost. The consumer sees the same brand and the same price tag, but receives significantly less. This enables corporations to maintain profit levels without appearing to continue hiking prices. Retailers play their role as well. Consolidation has left entire regions dominated by one or two grocery chains. With limited competition, stores carry little pressure to push back against supplier pricing. When a corporation says its mayonnaise must rise by 15% or its snack line by $1, retailers simply adjust the shelves accordingly. This lack of market tension allows the pricing loop to function unchecked. Marketing further ensures compliance. Companies frame increases as necessary for quality, sourcing improvements, or sustainability, concepts that distract from the fact that many products now cost 30 to 60% more without delivering added value. This pricing loop is why food inflation behaves differently from other economic cycles. Once corporations discovered that customers adapt to higher prices out of necessity, the entire industry realized it could operate on a new baseline. And that baseline keeps climbing, not because it must, but because it can. The most devastating force behind America's food crisis isn't just rising prices. It's the widening gulf between what groceries cost and what paychecks can realistically cover. The math has stopped adding up. Earnings climb by a modest 3 to 4% annually, while food prices in many categories rise 2 to 4 times faster. This disconnect pushes households into a permanent deficit where income growth can never catch the pace of inflation at the grocery store. The pressure becomes obvious when you compare actual numbers. A family that once spent $600 to $700 on monthly groceries now routinely faces bills crossing $1,000 to $1,200, even without premium products. This isn't lifestyle inflation, it's the baseline shifting beyond reach. For millions of workers earning $18 to $25 an hour, the cost of feeding a household now consumes a disproportionate share of their take-home pay, often rivaling rent or utilities. This imbalance forces choices that erode financial stability. Households cut back on savings, delay medical appointments, cancel insurance upgrades, or rely on credit cards to cover grocery gaps. With average credit card interest rates exceeding 22%, Any balance carried forward becomes a long-term financial burden. The food crisis, in effect, accelerates household debt and weakens economic resilience. Even dual-income families with combined earnings near $90,000 are feeling the strain because wage growth has been structurally outpaced by essential living costs. Meanwhile, other necessities, utilities, car insurance, rent, continue climbing, squeezing the same paycheck from multiple directions. Food becomes the easiest category to manipulate, so families reduce quality, quantity, or both. This mismatch isn't a small deviation in the system. It's a structural malfunction that compounds over time. When wages lag behind core essentials year after year, purchasing power erodes at a pace that is rarely reversible. Households may earn more nominal dollars, but those dollars purchase fewer calories, fewer meals, and fewer essentials. The food crisis isn't isolated. It's part of a larger economic trajectory where income is stagnant, costs accelerate, and the fundamental promise of work providing stability collapses. Groceries simply became the most visible place where Americans realized their paychecks could no longer keep up with the country they live in. America's food system is cracking at its foundation, and the source of that fracture is the farm itself. Long before groceries hit the shelf, the nation's agricultural engine has been running on borrowed time. Hammered by climate pressure, shrinking water reserves, rising input costs, and a workforce aging out faster than it can be replaced. The crisis is upstream, and the consequences flow straight into the price and availability of food. Water scarcity is one of the most destabilizing forces. Key agricultural regions now battle declining aquifers and severe drought cycles. In parts of the West, water allotments for farmers have been cut by 40 to 80%, forcing reductions in crop acreage and early harvest abandonment. Less water means lower yields, and lower yields translate directly into higher consumer prices for vegetables, fruits, and nuts that once defined American abundance. Input costs compound the strain. Fertilizer prices spiked dramatically in recent seasons, at one point rising over 70% for nitrogen-based products. Diesel costs for tractors, irrigation systems, and transport fleets continue to add financial stress. A farm that once operated on slim margins now absorbs expenses that eat into any potential profit. Many small and mid-sized farms cannot sustain these increases, pushing them toward consolidation, closure, or forced sale to large corporations. But the most alarming crisis is demographic. The average American farmer is nearly 60 years old, and fewer young workers are taking up the trade. Farming requires high upfront costs, long hours, unpredictable income, and enormous risk, conditions that discourage new entrants. As older farmers retire without successors, millions of acres face uncertain futures. This means fewer independent producers and greater reliance on consolidated megafarms that prioritize volume over diversity. Weather volatility adds another layer of instability. Heat waves, unexpected frosts, and shifting growing seasons reduce productivity and disrupt planting cycles. Crops that once thrived in predictable patterns now face conditions that fluctuate with little warning, damaging harvest consistency and raising insurance payouts. The result is a domestic food system increasingly unable to guarantee steady output. When farms struggle, the entire supply chain inherits that instability, leading to tighter supply, higher prices, and more vulnerability to global disruptions. The crisis at the farm doesn't stay at the farm. It becomes the foundation of every grocery shortage and price spike Americans face. As farms struggle and supply chains weaken, the next failure appears at the final point of contact, the grocery store itself. Across the country, the places where Americans buy food are disappearing, consolidating, or retreating from entire communities. The result is a growing landscape of food deserts, regions where millions of residents no longer have consistent, affordable access to basic groceries. Over the past several years, more than 3,000 grocery stores have closed nationwide, with many closures concentrated in rural counties, inner cities, and low-income suburbs. When a single supermarket serves tens of thousands of residents, any shutdown instantly forces families into long drives, unreliable convenience stores, or fast food outlets as their primary food source. This transforms daily necessities into logistical burdens, especially for the elderly, low-income households, or those without cars. Corporate consolidation intensifies the problem. Giants like Walmart, Kroger, and Amazon-owned Whole Foods now control such large portions of the market that their decisions determine entire regions' access to food. When profitability declines by even a small margin, these chains quickly exit areas they consider unviable. A single closure can eliminate the only full-service grocery option within 10 to 20 miles, leaving residents with no alternative but Dollar General-type stores that prioritize packaged, ultra-processed foods over fresh produce. Smaller independent grocers struggle to compete. With wholesale prices rising, credit access tightening, and margins collapsing, many can no longer survive against the buying power of national chains. When independents fall, communities lose their last buffer between corporate retreat and total food isolation. This concentration of power also affects pricing. In regions with only one dominant chain, studies show grocery prices run 5 to 15% higher than in areas with competitive markets. Without rivals pressuring them, corporations can raise prices, reduce variety, or cut quality without consequence. Shoppers have nowhere else to go. The consequence is a structural divide in food access. Wealthier neighborhoods attract premium chains, offering abundant produce, organic options, and stable pricing. Meanwhile, millions of working-class Americans navigate shrinking aisles, limited choices, and rising costs because corporate models no longer view their communities as profitable. The crisis isn't just about food becoming expensive, it's about food becoming physically inaccessible. And when access erodes, affordability and quality collapse right behind it. As traditional food pathways falter, an entirely different system is rising in the background. A decentralized, local, community-driven network built not from corporate strategy, but from necessity. Millions of Americans are quietly creating a parallel food economy, one that bypasses the industrial supply chain entirely. Farmer markets, small family operations, backyard gardens, seed exchanges, local co-ops, and community-supported agriculture programs have become survival tools in a system that no longer guarantees affordability or quality. This shift is not ideological, it's mathematical. When groceries climb 20%, 30%, or 50% while wages stagnate, households search for any alternative that offers stability. Local farmers, often operating on slimmer margins than corporate giants, provide produce at more predictable prices. Community co-ops allow residents to pool resources, buy in bulk, and develop purchasing power that rivals small retailers. Home gardeners grow herbs, greens, tomatoes, peppers, and potatoes with minimal inputs, cutting grocery bills while regaining control over freshness and nutritional quality. The decentralized model bypasses the inflationary traps baked into corporate food systems. There is no packaging surcharge, no cross-country transport cost, no executive markup. What you buy is what was grown, not what was processed, repackaged, or shrinkflated. This is why farmer markets have seen double-digit growth, why backyard gardening supply sales have surged, and why subscription-based produce boxes are expanding in every region of the country. Yet this parallel food economy, while empowering, is not enough to offset the magnitude of the national crisis. It provides relief, not replacement. Only a fraction of Americans have access to land, farmer markets, or consistent local supply. And while community-based food production adds resilience, it cannot fully counterbalance the industrial system's decline. It acts as a pressure valve, not a structural fix. That's where the next phase comes in. The projected 2026 food shock, the point at which long-running pressures converge. Every indicator suggests that the current trajectory is leading not to stabilization, but escalation. The warning signs are already visible in the agricultural sector, retail closures, supply chain backlogs, and corporate pricing patterns. Farms across the country continue shrinking due to water scarcity, rising operational costs, and aging ownership. Each year, tens of thousands of acres leave food production permanently. Climate volatility affects yields unpredictably, reducing the supply of fruits, vegetables, grains, and livestock feed. When output drops, prices rise. Not gradually, but sharply, because the system no longer has buffers to absorb shocks. Meanwhile, major grocery chains face their own pressures. Stores in lower-income regions operate on thinner margins, making them increasingly vulnerable to closure. As more areas lose their primary food outlets, entire populations depend on fewer retailers with greater pricing power. The fewer the stores, the higher the prices, especially when transportation costs spike again. And transportation will spike again. Diesel volatility, global shipping disruptions, and infrastructure strain guarantee that the cost of moving food will remain unpredictable. Every fluctuation compounds the retail cost, further widening the gap between what groceries cost and what households earn. Then there is the corporate factor. The pricing loop created during recent economic turbulence has proven extremely profitable. Companies now have a blueprint for raising prices without consumer backlash. If another round of supply disruptions occurs, whether from weather events, geopolitical tensions, or fuel surges, corporate pricing could escalate even faster than before. The final piece of the 2026 shock is household vulnerability. Savings rates remain historically low. Credit card balances have climbed to over $1.3 trillion, with interest rates pushing past 22%. When food prices spike again, millions of families will have no financial cushion to absorb the increase. Grocery budgets will become crisis points. Nutrition will deteriorate further. Food insecurity will expand into income brackets that never imagined facing it. All signs point to a future where food becomes not only more expensive, but more unstable, where supply chains grow more fragile, where corporate consolidation accelerates, and where access depends as much on geography as on income. The nation is drifting toward a moment when eating well becomes a privilege, eating adequately becomes a struggle, and the simple act of feeding a family becomes one of the hardest financial decisions an American will make. Because the next crisis won't start on Wall Street, it will start at the dinner table.